is a time to question. There is a time for answers. There is a time to challenge. There is a time to speculate. There is a time for change. There is a time for truth. The time is now. Welcome to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for Pirate and Conspiracy Radio. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Showtime. Welcome to the show. I'm Brent Holland. Welcome one and all to Night Fright. Get the coffee going, get the tea going, get a beverage of your choice going, folks. If we got a great show for you tonight to settle in and relax to, get in that comfy chair. The book is called The World's Most Haunted House. The true story of the Bridgeport Poltergeist on Lindley Street. We're going to take you back to the 70s tonight. We're going to be looking at this new book out by author William Hall, who's our guest tonight. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about William Hall's background here. He's a good-looking guy as I look at his bio page. In this unprecedented work, the story of the 1974 Bridgeport, Connecticut poltergeist is at last revealed. A crowd of more than 2,000 onlookers gathered. National media reported jumping furniture, floating refrigerators, and attacking entities. Decades after the publicity queries quieted, more than 40 hours of never before released interviews with police officers, firefighters, and others tell a story as it actually unfolded. We return tonight, folks, to 1974 to find out why it is deemed the haunting that should have brought the paranormal into mainstream science. I want to welcome William Hall. Bill, is it okay I call you Bill tonight?
Oh, yes, certainly.
I want to welcome Bill to the show for the very first time, but definitely not the last. How are you tonight, my friend?
I'm great. Thank you, Brent, for having me.
Most welcome, most welcome. Now, out of all the stories, the paranormal stories out there in the world, what led you into the depths of this one?
That's a great question. I was doing what every intellectual does in the morning, having my coffee and reading the Facebook. And I came. Thank you. I like you, Brent. You laugh at my joke. There's no S on the end. No, but and I was looking through it. A lady posted there in one of those community pages. You know, you belong to the communities and where you grew up, and I grew up in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And it said, "Does anybody remember the haunted house on Lindley Street?" And it occurred to me, you know, I used to write newspaper columns in some local papers, Magic and the Unknown, and, you know, investigate this kind of thing. And it occurred to me I never really looked into Lindley Street. And so I just, you know, Googled, you know, as we all do. And after reading newspaper article after newspaper article, I knew that regardless of what happened on Lindley Street, there definitely was a heck of a story there. And I wanted to look into it further, and that really was the jumping ground. So I wrote down all the names of everybody that was mentioned in the newspaper, and started to try to find their number, and many of them aren't with us, of course, because it was so long ago. But I did get in touch with the first responding police officer, Joe Tomic, who was kind enough to give me an interview after interrogating me a bit, and typical good police officer style, retired or not, you know, he was ready. And he said there was a huge investigation with where all the officers were forced to. They didn't have a choice. They were forced to be interviewed at the police station in a conference room set up. He didn't know by whom. He didn't know what was behind it. He had no idea other than he was forced to go in there and be interviewed. And so finally, I found the guy who was the head of those investigations, Boyce Beatty, and he ended up giving me an interview on the phone. All the while, I don't know where this is going. I certainly don't know if there's a book here. It could be, but I had no idea. And Boyce, I asked him if he knew where this huge data was in interviews, and he said, "Yes, I do." And I said, "Well, do you know where is it?" He said, "Well, it's in a box in my basement." And it took off from there. So, but that's really why is that prompted me. And then once I saw all of these witnesses, the police officers, the firemen, the priests, the reporters, the neighbors, the onlookers, it was just too many people. Like I said, I knew no matter what happened there was a very interesting story behind it.
Can you take us back to 1974 and give a brief synopsis of what took place there?
Sure. I'll try to be brief because I know we'll get into it, deeper later. But first, just to set the stage, around that time, 1973, The Exorcist came out. And in the late 60s, Hollywood was really having a good time with the demon child theme, Rosemary's Baby and The Omen and all those kinds of great movies. And this all blew up in November 1974 to the public. Behind the scenes, it was much earlier, but just to give you kind of the synopsis of the public view of it, in November 1974, the Gooden family, which was Jerry Gooden and Laura Gooden and little Marcy Gooden, she was 10 years old, their adopted child, and Jerry and Laura by then were early middle age. And he was a maintenance man, just a working class family. And they lived in this tiny little bungalow home, 738 square feet, tiny little home in the middle of the city there, 2 blocks from the hospital, lower income neighborhood. And, in this tiny 3-room, well, they made it 4-room, making a room for Marcy actually by knocking a closet from the master bedroom down so she can so Jerry could fashion a tiny bedroom for her. I mean, that's how the house is very tiny, and definitely not your typical haunted house. Almost didn't qualify, but
no mist emanating from the beneath the doors. No,
right. I mean,
just easy.
No, I know, but that is one of the kind of features of it. Is it is quite weird. It's not this huge 1700 house in the middle of the farmland and, in the middle of the woods that has a spiral staircase and the butler and, I mean,
the old Victorian haunted house, right?
Right. And, a lot of that is what happens, houses that are around so long, I mean, we do see them as, truly being, haunted in various ways. But here we are just right in the middle of, massive civilization here. We have this tiny little house. And so they're living there in November, as what happened every November for the last few years is there were these banging sounds on the inside and outsides of the walls. And it was driving the family crazy. They weren't scared of it. It was just annoying. They didn't think supernatural. And
now, Bill, was this house self-contained or did it have neighbors on either side that they were sharing walls with?
They were not sharing walls. There is a house to the right, and there was a house to the left, relatively close, but not sharing walls, no. And so they heard these banging sounds as they did every November, and that's really not what started it, because they had been putting up with that since 1971. And so they go to their regular, ritual where they go to upstate New York to see family and visit and go to church and do groceries and go home. And they come home and the TV is down from Marcy's bedroom off the high shelf where it is, which is very odd. And and without really knowing, just saying, well, that's bizarre. And he puts it back, Jerry does, and it falls again. So then he unhooks it because he figures, somebody's going to get hurt. But again, you don't think, supernatural.
No, for sure.
And then
I wouldn't anyways.
well, yes, you would. Yeah, I probably would too now. But we think everything now. It's nothing's off the table with what you find out is out there. But so things get worse that night. But shades going up and just strange things happening. So anyhow, they go to sleep thinking tomorrow will be better, and of course it's not. Jerry gets up and it's much worse, and the table flips and there's knives coming out of the knife block that flew towards Jerry, dishes flying around the room, and they had these really heavy chairs, these recliner chairs. They had 3 of them in their little living room, and they were opening and closing on their own, just crazy stuff. So they the 3 of them went on the porch, and they're jumping up and down, screaming for help to Janet, the little girl who is the daughter of the neighbor across the street that they're good friends with. She's walking the dog, and he said, please, we're in trouble here. Go get your father, who was their friend and neighbor and also a Bridgeport police officer, Officer John Holsworth. They go and get him, and he comes back. And he says, stay on the porch. He has no idea what's going on. He goes in and sees all, the house is a mess, and he sees things happen. He doesn't know what to do, so he calls for backup. More police come. They come in, see stuff in every room happening. They don't know what to do. So they call the fire department. The fire department comes, and they go all in there, check everything out. They don't know what to do. So they call the fire department priest. He comes. And he says something's definitely evil, and he leaves to go contact an exorcist. Meanwhile, the neighbor heard the Warrens, at a lecture, and so she called the Warrens in, and they came by, and then of course all these vehicles outside, and finally the press gets hold of it, and this thing is just growing and growing, and finally there's thousands of people outside. They close the road. They got paddy wagons. There's people outside that see the swans, these cement decorations outside moving. People see things through the window. I mean, it's just police going in and out, seeing things. So this thing spreads around the world, and after a few days, finally, the superintendent of Bridgeport comes out and says, it's a hoax. The little girl did it all, and everybody goes home. So that's our. There's of course a whole book worth of stuff that's happened in between, but literally they had 12 firemen and about 16 police officers, and it was just so. I mean, that alone, of course, starts attracting people, and then once word gets out of what it's about, finally it hit the AP wire, and then before you know it, it's in Israel newspapers in Australia, and so
it just explodes internationally.
Yeah.
Wow. What a story, folks. The book is called The World's Most Haunted House, and it just may be. We're going to get into that tonight to find out what was taking place there. The true story of the Bridgeport Poltergeist on Lindley Street. Our guest tonight is William Hall, Bill Hall, and easy way to get his book, as all our guests, www.nightfrightshow.com. Just click on tonight's guest book cover, and you can order the book from the comfort of your own home. And tonight's a great night, folks. Just kick back, relax. Busy day at work. It's a great way to kick back and listen to this show, and we're going to take you on a great haunted house ride. Now, just a word of warning, put the lights on because it's going to get creepier as we get into it. We're going to go back to Bill now. Now, Bill, when you were presented with all this material from this fella's basement, was there one thing that stood out above the other that said, yes, this is something I want to pursue?
You mean just seeing it there, or after listening to it?
After listening to it.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll answer both. How's that?
Sure.
First in seeing of it, I picked up a reel-to-reel that had a note inside it by Jerry Sulfin from Duke University, one of the other investigators that Boyce brought in, and that was it was a reel-to-reel tape, and it had 8 hours of police station interviews. It wasn't all the police that were interviewed, but I remember holding that, thinking, "Wow, this is something here." 8 hours, in police office, in a conference room set up for these interviews at the police department. This is going to be cool. So that's the answer to question one. As far as the second one, it really was a culmination of just listening to a lot of witnesses. I remember it being around hour 20 to 22 that it went to my mind that this is, 110%, a real legitimate case. There was nothing beforehand that told me it wasn't, but the interviews were long and I wanted to hear from everybody. And I really had to wait until I got the reel-to-reel back, because it also contained a police officer interview with somebody who thought it wasn't real. So I really wanted to hear what he had to say, because that's very important, and so, but as far as incidents, one of the real compelling incidents, and it's very rare in a case to have this, but Marcy was sitting on a sofa in the living room with her legs crossed and her hands on her lap, and there were 3 police officers talking to her. They were actually in the middle of talking to her. There was firemen in the room too, amongst others. That poor little house was filled. And the chair rises up and did a complete 360 flip, throwing Marcy out of the chair. And what was really convincing about that is that each of these people who witnessed that event were interviewed separately. And there was a model of the house and a piece of paper, graph of the house. And each person was asked, where were you? Where were you? Where were you? Where were the other people? And where was Marcy, and how was she sitting, and what exactly happened?
Still there? Did we lose you? I think we may have lost him, folks. You still there, my friend? Problem with this call. Here we go again with the internet. Isn't this funny? All right, let's see if we can get him back. We may have to do this via telephone again, like we did last week. Remember that, folks? Wasn't that hilarious when that everything went dead? We were talking about conspiracies last week, and everything went dead. And jeez, we're trying to figure out what the problem was. So, anyways, just let me see if I can.
I'm here.
Oh, you're back, my friend.
I don't know what happened. I'm showing I'm connected, so I don't know. That's bizarre.
That's bizarre. Yeah. Okay, well, let's just keep going. That's all. Actually, let's just keep going. If it happens again, what I'll ask you to do is email me your phone number, so I can call you back. We'll do it via telephone. Would that be okay?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was just thinking of that. I got to make sure I have your email.
Yeah, or you can just send it via a Skype text.
Oh, I got it.
I won't give it out on the air. Don't worry. No worries. It's just so I have it, and I'll give you a call right back if it happens again.
If you give it out on the air, somebody may finally call me. No.
The book is called, folks, The World's Most Haunted House, The True Story of the Bridgeport Poltergeist on Lindley Street. The guest tonight, William Hall, www.nightfrightshow.com. Just click on tonight's guest book cover, take you right to a great spot where you can order the book from the comfort of your own home. Let's go back. We just had a brief interruption. So you've got all this material, you're going through it, you just listen to a reel-to-reel, you're 22 hours into it, and all of a sudden you discover an epiphany goes off. Was there something behind that epiphany, or was it just a culmination of all these things coming together all at once?
Well, it was both. It was all of the witnesses and, hearing all of the police officer interviews, which were really critical. I would say more critical than, nothing against firemen, but, based on the training, the police officers were really critical. But the priests and reporters, too, were quite something. But once you had all of that, all of the kind of, factual proof, I, the towards that 22nd hour or 20th hour, I don't remember exactly. It was extended interviews with the family. I heard some of them before, and you pick up another because I didn't really listen to them in any particular order, and picked up another one. It was, after listening to the family talk for like an hour and finishing each other's sentences, I mean, not that I suspected that they were, lying, because they're really, if you look at the facts, they're just, I mean, there's just, it just doesn't make sense on any level, given who they are, given, that they lost everything, didn't make any money, I mean, just given all of that doesn't make sense. So I didn't suspect them necessarily, but just listening to them and finishing each other's sentences, and you could, I think that epiphany was really feeling their pain, that this was a family that was really suffering. And it just really came through. And I would say if there was an epiphany above, once you had all the factual proof, and, there was no doubt about that part, just hearing that, that emotional piece of just feeling their suffering and anger and depression and stress and all of that really made it human. And that's really what I tried very hard to get across, those feelings in the book, because I think that's a really important part of the story that, we forget. And I felt guilty at times, because...
Why's that?
Because I wonder how the family would feel about the book. You know what I mean? I guess that's kind of, but, you want to do them justice by saying, hey, here's your story, and you were good people, and you weren't crazy and stuff. And on the other hand, it's a fun and interesting thing, and I'm having fun with them. People have fun listening to it, but of course, it really was people's lives. So again, it's not enough where I'm not crying at home or anything. You know what I mean? But you kind of reflect on that and say, I hope that they would think that I did it justice.
Did you have any? I was going to ask if you had any contact with Marcy. She must be all grown up by now. Or Jerry, perhaps. Is he still around?
Jerry and Laura are deceased,
Okay.
and Marcy, as far as we know, is living in your neck of the woods somewhere.
Up in Canada somewhere?
Yeah, as far as we know, as of a few years ago. But no, I didn't. It would have been nice. I wouldn't expect her to want to, be interviewed or anything like that. But certain basics could have been confirmed. How okay is she? That kind of thing, maybe. But I've only seen one case, the Enfield Poltergeist in England, where somebody as an adult, the girl actually went on one interview. And other than that, I've never seen any of these children, because usually, of course, the preteen or teenagers, never seen any of them ever.
I guess more or less they want to put it behind them too as they mature, and they just want to forget about it, and they certainly don't want it coming back, I guess.
Yeah, it's really kind of a no-win for them. It's like, oh yeah, I'm the one who was a freak when I was younger, or I'm the one that. So it's it's kind of like, what do they get out of it? They don't really get anything out of it, but because from my research, I mean, I've shown some of these people, it's questionable whether they even told their spouse. It's not a given necessarily. It's just such a bizarre thing. If you haven't went through it yourself, it's as you know, Brent. I mean, these things are tough to share with people.
Now you've got a background as a magician, and folks, fans of this show know that I've worked on rock shows, and I've worked on Michael Jackson's tour and all stuff like that. A couple of the people whose shows I worked on also were the late great Doug Henning and David Copperfield.
Wow, that's great.
And I'm sworn to secrecy, folks, but let me tell you, when they make things disappear, they don't really disappear. That's all I'm going to say. Smoke and mirrors, baby. And sight lines. So, given that background that you have as a magician, and you know how hoaxes are pulled off, and many of them are very, very convincing.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Again, was there something specific about this story that just rang true?
Uh, yes, I mean, I think with all these things, it's important to you really have to pull back and look at all possibilities, and I think that's a good lesson for all of us, including myself. Because just because I know magic I won't doesn't mean I'll be able to recognize mental illness, for example. You know what I mean? So I think it was Bill Roll who said that I'm more like an organizer. If I don't have the right experts in here, I can't really do proper research. So, and that means psychologists and and the other people. Now, granted, depending on the situation, you may not need any of that. It really depends on what you're dealing with. But I'll give you an example. There were some things that were not convincing to me in themselves. So, like somebody would say, the table fell over by itself, and when I went over to look, there was nothing there. To me, that's so what? I mean, I can make that happen. I mean, that's easy. Yeah, there doesn't have to be anything there. So we make assumptions that if something falls over by trickery, then something must be tied to it. That's not needed at all. So just like with the refrigerator in this particular case had floated a number of times, and as a magician, just hearing the words floated, I don't know what that means. You know what I mean? You have to tell me what you actually saw. Luckily, Boyce, as an interviewer, did as good a job as any magician would have did. I mean, he didn't take any generalization. He wanted to know exactly what they first saw, what happened, what end lifted, did it move with a speed that was consistent with gravity, slower than gravity, faster than gravity would have taken it. So he really did a great job, and that was very helpful because without that, if he simply asked, did the table, what happened? Oh, the refrigerator floated. Oh, that's fascinating. Then I still wouldn't have known what happened. Did it really float or did it just jiggle or you don't really know because there's what somebody perceives and then what really happens. So there's the language part of it, as a magician. And then there's, the other part as far as like with the refrigerator floating, that's as a magician, it's either got to be hydraulics. And most of the police officers said, oh, take a forklift to do that, take hydraulics to do that. But, there's other ways too. I mean, it may not be a real refrigerator, right? I mean, it could be cardboard. I mean, it wasn't, and that's a little more ridiculous and stuff. But I'm saying you really have to think, outside that with everything. And I think that kind of thinking really plays well into the paranormal. Like, for example, when we look at possession, granted, there's the whole besides the mental illness part of it and that sort of thing, and dissociation and all that stuff. But I mean, if it's quote unquote a real possession of sorts, we usually think, or it's common to say it's something evil that took over the body. But as a magician, I try to think of what are all the possibilities. Maybe it's something that's stuck inside, didn't want to be there, and is really mad that it's stuck. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Different angles, different perspectives.
Yeah, different angles, right. It doesn't mean that I'm right, and it doesn't mean that I even believe that. It just means that is the one thing as a magician that I've been taught is, you try to look at all, you try not to assume as much. If the coin is there and it disappears, you start wondering, well, did I really see a coin? Did it, you think a little bit differently. And in this case, really, I mean, a TV floating in the air and going like a pendulum as somebody walks around it, well, that's pretty darn convincing. A refrigerator floating, that's pretty convincing. A picture flying off the wall, that's easy. Rocking chair rocking by itself, that's easy. I mean, so there are things that are easy, and then there were things that were just so complex happening in this house that even if you went in there with the mind that this is fake, you had things happening in every room. And also you had like in police officer Joe Tomic actually said to himself, if you're there, show yourself, and things happen. So you had those kind of tests going on too. But just when you put all of that evidence together, the audio phenomenon, all that stuff, it just goes way beyond. It goes beyond what any sensible and logical, magician would even have to do to prove a house is haunted. You know what I mean?
Right. Plus, on top of that, they weren't in it to sell a story. They never made a dime off of it.
Right, right. So obviously it goes way beyond that because now you have the characters and the situation. It's typical poltergeist indicators and stuff. But, I was answering strictly from a magician point of view. Now, of course, things get easier because you don't need, if you're dealing with somebody you trust or a family and, then, of course, it cuts a lot of those corners. And in this case, I was purely, I had to do more pure investigation because, I wasn't there. I didn't know the people involved, that kind of thing. But it was the types of events and the volume of events happening all at once to those people, that was just beyond, what anybody could have pulled off. I mean, it was virtually impossible. And, of course, didn't make any sense, like you said, if you take it in the context. But even the family finishing each other's sentences was plenty proof enough because first of all, they didn't have the brain capacity to, I don't think I would either, but just if you listen to them, the way that they finished sentences and facts and contributed to the story as they told it together was just so detailed and so intricate that it had to have happened that way because it would have been, you wouldn't even bother trying to, to reveal it that way. It would just be so much harder than what you'd have to do. So. Kind of a long-winded answer to that. But.
The priest you had mentioned, the firefighter's priest, he went to get an exorcist. Did he ever come back with an exorcist?
No. The case got so public that the church wasn't gonna get involved in it. They didn't say that. They said there's no proof that it's anything but normal. Means. It's like, all right,
Any idea if the priest ever came back and went into the house?
Oh, well, yeah. The priest being Father Doyle, he did go back to the house and he stayed and remained very involved with the family behind the scenes. But, to the paper, he towed the party line. He said, no reason to believe anything, abnormal, whatever. But then you look at the police report and it says Father Doyle believes it's an evil spirit, so, so what he said, but, you got to give him credit. What's he going to do, But now Father Charbonneau, who's the priest from Middlebury that came with the Warrens, no one to this day, I talked to Paulino, who was the 21-year-old seminarian at the time that also went with the Warrens. Everybody, even not only that case, but just for the rest of that guy's career, nobody knew how Father Charbonneau got away with what he got away with because he would talk to any newspaper that would listen to him, and he said everything about this case. That there was the audio, and you heard the cat say jingle bells, and and he saw the things that happened, and
the cat
the
said jingle bells.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Now the cat part of it, and that was one of the things, the cat talking, that was a big thing in this case. The reality is, I don't believe for a second that the cat, quote unquote, talked. There was audio phenomena, and it was linked to the cat because, of course, we go by whatever's closest. So like Jerry, the father, would say, the cat bangs on the door and yells to him. And it would, he didn't see the cat do that. The cat was the only thing in the basement, so that's what the father said, But there was audio phenomena in the case. There was the footsteps, the knocking on the doors, the pounding on the interior and exterior of the walls, as well as there was audio phenomena related to, that the Swans got blamed for, that, just because they were nearby, and they were kind of uh, recognizable, but the police would complain, and the police would be on guard outside the house for crowd control, and they complained that they heard guttural sounds coming from the swans. Well, how could you tell something comes from an inanimate object? You can't. But obviously the direction of, and people had seen the swans move, and they were these heavy cement planters that were relatively popular in the 70s. I know my parents actually had a donkey, and they had the planter and some of the other, but I guess animal planters that made of cement were kind of popular in the 70s. But so they had those swans, and they got blamed for that. So I believe it was more like the proximity effect, in audio that and similar to ventriloquism, you go by what appears it to be coming from. And then the cat also made some weird noises and looked up at the empty space, and like animals will do when they see this kind of stuff. The dogs did the same thing. So that's the thing with the cat, but that was a big part of it. And then to make matters worse, Marcy would do some very poor ventriloquism with the cat, which of course helped her get blamed in the end. Oh, she made the cat talk, but nobody really bought that. She was just playing around, and then the police officers also, to add more to this rumor, the police officers, when one of the guys came in, they told Marcy, said, go over to him, tell him his brother's name's Frank, and tell him the cat said it, So she went over and played along and did this thing, and the cop was like, he was quite startled by it, And because everything else was going on, and then you add this to the mix, And I remember when Boyce was interviewing the police officer who was in on the joke, and he was explaining what they did, and Boyce said, "Well, how did he laugh when you told him?" And he said, "We never told him." So, so that's a 40-year-old rumor. I mean, people still talk about that. The police officer and, Marcy's psychic and the cat's psychic and blah. So there's, that's the thing about real life, as you know, Brent. It's not like in the horror movies, you don't see that. There's one emotion, scream and yell. And then there's also, you don't have people standing around playing jokes like that. But, so that ended up being a story that was carried, to this day.
That's funny. Lorraine and Ed Warren, what was their final report, for lack of a better word? What was their conclusion?
Well, everybody agreed it was a poltergeist. Ed, of course, from his, Catholic upbringing, everything was a demon, So naturally, this was a demon too, In fact, one of the entities that appeared in the basement, Ed said he saw horns on it. Now, Father Charbonneau was asked about that, and he said absolutely not. There was no horns, and Now I believe Ed really saw what he. I don't believe his line. I believe he saw exactly what he said he saw, but I think he saw it through his eyes. And his background, and, that was his thing, that these things are all demons, and he even said that, it's a poltergeist, and I do believe it's a combination of the classic, psychokinesis, the reoccurrent, reoccurrent, that thing. And then he said, but I'd go a step further, and here's where the other people wouldn't agree with me. So he knew it, but he'd say, I would also see that it was dark and demonic because, the entity through Marcy, and, there's all this other stuff that happened. So he said, well, I would say it's demonic. But, personally, he could be right, but we throw these words around quite loosely. I think our English language is very primitive when it comes to this kind of stuff. I don't know. In my mind, I don't think there's a lot of things I don't think are evil that, when we see things being knocked down, I don't know, is that an evil act? I don't know. Picking up and throwing the girl, is that an evil act? Well, it could be, but I don't know if you'd say the whole thing is evil. It could be neutral, it could be scared. We know anger and violence, and a lot of that stuff's caused by.
Well, let me ask you this. What's your final conclusion on it all? Did you feel, after you've been through all the evidence and the interviews and everything, do you think there was something more than just a poltergeist at work?
Well, I think it was a poltergeist, but of course, the big question is that doesn't get us any closer, right? I mean,
Just speculation's fine
yeah,
too.
what is a poltergeist?
Yeah.
But what I could say is I find no evidence of any sort of a pure evil. You know what I mean? Other than in the crowd. If you want to say who's a demon, you would say that the guys who tried to burn the house down. Well, the family was in the house because that happened. So when we use those words evil and demon, I think we're talking about a very pure kind of evil, and I really didn't see any evidence of that here. Now, were they negative or neutral? Maybe that's more accurate. Did they do things that were bad? Well, I would say picking up and throwing somebody is bad, but we don't really know. We don't know if that's a reaction, if that's a fear reaction, if we don't know what's behind it, because we all know a lot of anger is really a manifestation of somebody who is afraid and cornered, and rather than evil or just being a bad person or angry person. So so I'm very that's that broader thinking coming out where I say, well, what's really evil? If a model boat is moved 4 inches to the left on its own, is that demonic? I don't know. I don't really think so. So I think we do have multiple things going on. I would personally, and this is the best theory I heard, and again, I'm open to all theories because I think the worst thing we can do in our line of thinking, for lack of a better term, I think the worst thing that we can do is be closed-minded amongst each other, because I'm just happy. You know what I mean? I'm just happy that we're actually talking and thinking, and so if you say it's a demon and I think it's something else, I'm not going to argue with you. I mean, that's the worst thing we can do. I think as long as you're thinking, and I've heard from people I know and trust that exorcisms do help, and I don't know if that's because that's the other thing. Do they work because of something else, or do they work because of the reason you think they work, or And I've known people who said, "Yeah, I do them," and I agree with you, Bill. I don't really think it's a demon or whatever, but it seems to work, so I keep doing it. So I've heard that too, but so we really don't know. We make assumptions. But to get to your question, before I do, I just want to give a good example of why that broad thinking. I'm always that devil's advocate for excuse the pun, but kind of thinking, because in Lindley Street, everybody said it's always going after the religious items. Everybody was saying that. The family was like, how come it always goes after the religious items? Well, Boyce, he tracked every incident that occurred, from the witnesses, and he plotted them all and everything, being the scientist he is. And he concluded, just based on the numbers, that religious items were affected 10% of the time. 90% of the time, it was a non-religious item. So anecdotally, everybody's like, it's going after all the religious items is evil. But when you looked at the facts, it actually was tipping tables and chairs and other stuff more. And then you add to the fact, all right, well, you got a family who is very religious, because the Goodins were very religious.
Were they Catholic, Protestant?
Yes, yeah, they were Roman Catholic.
Okay.
And so they had more religious items than the average family anyhow. And the house is tiny. I mean, it kind of would be hard for it not to impact like every item almost, But so it's just, I always like to look at, what are the real facts, and we draw a conclusion based on that. But it's a pretty polar conclusion to say this is a demon. To me, a demon would have to be very, very evil, and I just don't see that kind of evil here. Now, it could be all wrong, because I mean, what do I know? But we're just talking theory now.
Absolutely.
But on the point of what I think, I mean, and I'm stealing this because it's not my own thought, but quantum quantum mechanics and string theory and the multiverse seem to make the most sense to me. And again, that's not a definite either. But to me, when Paulino, the seminarian, when I interviewed him and he said, "Here's my take on it," and I really loved his explanation. He said, "Picture, a table where you have a pile of papers, and you run by it, and the papers get upset and kind of fly around." He said, "I think that's a lot of what's going on, what went on in the Lindley Street house." He said, "The refrigerator floating, I don't think that's an evil act. I think that's caused by the intersection of these colliding dimensions, parallel worlds, whatever you want to call it, the multiverse, and when they collide, when the electromagnetic energy is perfect and these worlds collide based on the negativity in the family, high water tables, sandy soils, power lines, whatever happens to be the perfect combination, which we don't even know what it all is. We just know some of the indicators. Whenever that happens, you have that disturbance. And in fact, somebody who knows nothing about the paranormal or anything, and it was a guy I knew who was a physicist, and I mentioned, if I told you that there was a disturbance in a house and a refrigerator started floating and, as a physicist, what's the first thing you think of? And he said, electromagnetic energy. And I thought that, to me, that was fascinating. Maybe it was basic, but I was like blown away because that's the whole, theory of these, worlds colliding. So I think a lot of the things that happen in the house were not deliberate. And then there were things that were clearly deliberate, and some were very frightening.
Can you give us an example of one?
Sure. Yeah, it all was frightening. Let's put it that way. Because even if I say a table tipped, you and me, we and all the listeners, we're saying, all right, well, but it doesn't sound frightening. But of course, even that is, anything happening by itself like that's frightening.
There would be a for sale sign on the front of the house immediately.
I hear you. Yeah. By the way, the family did. They spent a lot of time out of the house. They sent their daughter out of the house. They stayed with family. They had people stay with them. So they did all of the right things that you would expect, a family to do, besieged by this kind of thing. The other thing is with one of the two really, well, the frightening thing, anytime an entity picked up Marcy and threw her, and that happened twice, once against the wall and once across the room, and of course the flipping in the chair. So a lot of it centered on her, and so those were frightening. Where the entities were seen, it was frightening. When the entity went around, it was Paul who put Marcy behind him, and there was 4 entities, and he described, the ability to see them kind of like when you have a match and you see that blurry stuff that comes on top of the flame, So them there, they're there, but and he said they work in like an organized pact, and he got the distinct impression that they were intelligent, they knew how to push buttons, and when one went around him to Marcy, he felt bone structure. And to me, that was chilling.
Absolutely. That's physical.
Yeah. And he said he didn't tell the Warrens that because he said they would have looked at him. He was 21 years old. He didn't talk about that for many, many years, only within the last few years as he talked about it. He said it felt like bird-like, thin bone structure. He realized that it was like a real being, that it was a physical being. It wasn't spiritual, and it was supposed to be, and it was supposed to be a demon, and because he believed all that same thing, and that kind of blew his mind, and he started thinking there's got to be more to this. But so that was a shocking incident.
Yeah, that would scare the bejesus out of me. That's for sure. Now, how long a period did this take place over? A week, 2 weeks, a year, 2 years?
The public part took place Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, in November. So it was a 3-day kind of thing. And then, of course, the press it elongated it naturally. But to the family, shortly after they adopted Marcy in 1968, little things would happen. They'd see a door move by itself, and keys out of place, chair in the wrong position, that kind of thing, where you kind of think you're going crazy or think nothing at all, and then over time, that then it occurs to you something's really happening. And then in 1971, that's when the banging sound started in November, and what's really cool is. The officer, John Holsworth, said, Jerry, why don't we record these? Why don't you record these noises so that the police and fire department and civil engineers, so they get a better chance figuring out what it is. And so he said, okay. So they set up a tape recorder, and in the wee hours of the morning, recorded the sounds. And those sounds were given to Ed to listen to, and Ed ended up giving them to Boyce Beatty, and Boyce Beatty gave them to me, the actual cassette. So I mean, that was just so cool. And actually, there's a bonus page in the book where you can actually hear those sounds. If you're willing to.
There's a good point. Are you willing to listen to the unexplained, folks? The book is called The World's Most Haunted House, The True Story of the Bridgeport Poltergeist on Lindley Street. Our guest tonight, William J. Hall. I'm calling it Bill. He likes that. www.nightfrightshow.com. www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on tonight's guest book cover. Order the book. If you're brave enough to. No, I'm kidding, folks. Go order the book. This is a perfect time of year. We're heading into the fall season. The nights are getting longer, and you're looking for things to read and to get you in that spooky mood. This is the perfect book for that, for you to settle in on your couch and just relax when the kids are off to bed, or if you're a student, if you're up late studying and you need a break, perfect book for that. Let's go back to Bill. Bill, you're a dad. You've got 2 little girls yourself.
Boys.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
No, that's all right. No.
If these things started happening at home, how would you handle it? The for sale sign, right? As I mentioned before.
Yeah. After getting proof in a movie deal and and writing the book, kids, we have to stay. It's my next book. Come on.
Part 2.
Yeah.
The world's second most haunted house.
Exactly. I mean, it's a tough question because you of course immediately, and I think you'd probably agree, Brent, you immediately try to go through in your mind, what would I really do, and what would I think that I would really do, So I think I would get out of there. I mean, that's all I could think of. And the Goodins, I mean, they tried a bunch of things. Part of it though was the Goodins did believe what they were told, which is if you leave, it's just going to follow you. Because that's what the Warrens told them, and Father Charbonneau said, this, we really have to fight this thing here because you leave, it's going to follow you. It's not. It's related to the family. They said in a nice way, of course, but and so they did believe that, but. The good news is during the height of this activity, I mean, when everything happened with Officer Holsworth coming over to help, I mean, they asked him to stay, and he stayed the night sleeping in the recliner, so they weren't alone that first night. And then, of course, once all the police were there, I mean, the police were in the house, all day, and then they had other police that were there at night. So there were a lot of people around the house, family, Jerry's 2 brothers and stuff. So they had a lot of support when they were at the house. And when they weren't there, some nights they stayed there, but, they really kept it moving and varied it. And it came to the point where they had a bag ready to go. They had the bag ready to go. And, and then they would decide, do they stay or do they go? And Jerry used to open the door and go around the house first, to assess what had happened before the rest of the family entered. So it became like a new the new normal. But anyhow, getting back to your question, what would I do? Almost forgot the question. God, should have went into politics. I could have not answered the question. But,
Oh, that's a whole other show. We call them aliens here in Canada.
oh yeah,
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 politicians. Yeah.
definitely not as fun to study, but uh, yeah, I can't picture that. That would be tough. I really can't picture staying, um, and I don't think my son would stay.
Mm.
So I think I would have to go anyhow. So I have an easy answer because I would just, then I could tell everybody I would have stayed, but I had to go because of him.
So
But
you'd have an out.
yeah, I'd have an out. Yeah,
You'd
but no,
have
I think I say I would. But from what I hear in real life, a lot of people don't because they really want to. Um, it's frightening to a point, but there were a lot of other emotions that really came out here. I mean, at one point, Jerry, was yelling in the air. I mean, he wanted to fight that thing, and he
Sure.
even says, if I could have got a hold of it, I would have killed it.
Yeah.
I mean, because he was defenseless, and he wants to protect his family, and he
Precisely.
finally was at his wit's end, where he's like, come out, come on, come out
Show
where I
yourself.
see you, yeah, show yourself so I can kill you, or kill me or leave me alone or get out, or because you're just so he had the depression, the anxiety, the anger, the fear, all of those kinds of emotions. And of course, I hear in talking to other people who've experienced this kind of thing that it is, like a lot of things in life. It's a emotional experience, and then there's the fear of what's causing it, but there's also the real fear of something falls on our head.
We're going to take a 6-minute break, folks. Don't go anywhere. I am riveted to this seat. Talking about the world's most haunted house, our guest, William Hall. We'll be right back, folks, in 6 minutes. Stick around. Welcome back, folks. I'm your host, Brent Holland. Welcome back to Night Fright. A lot of time left, folks. If you're just joining us, we got a great show going tonight. The world's most haunted house. The true story of the Bridgeport Poltergeist on Lindley Street. William Hall is its author and our guest tonight, Bill Hall, and he's right here. I'm going to be returning to him in just a second. Just wanted to let you know, www.nightfrightshow.com. Not only will you find our guest's book cover there, and just click on that and head on over to Amazon, but I have a book out. And if I don't do this, my publisher will kill me. So for the next minute, bear with me. The book is on the Kennedy assassination. It's called JFK Assassination, and November's coming up pretty quick, and so is Christmas. Hint, hint. From DEALEY PLAZA to the Oval Office. Now, what is unique about this particular book is it has Ted Sorensen's last interview. Ted Sorensen, folks, was JFK's speechwriter and closest aide. He was so close to JFK that it was he that wrote the letter to Khrushchev during the Cuban Missile Crisis to take the missiles out of Cuba. And in the book, for the first time in mainstream, folks, he confirms conspiracy, not a coup d'etat, but a conspiracy nonetheless. And it's full of first-person witnesses like the doctor who worked on JFK, Beverly Oliver, who was in Dealey Plaza, and an unknown story. Very few people know this story about James Tague. James Tague was the third person wounded in Dealey Plaza that day, and he became inadvertently responsible for the magic bullet. The Warren Commission, the first one, had accounted for all 3 bullets. They said 2 hit Kennedy, 1 causing the fatal headshot, another 1 hit Governor Connolly, causing 5 wounds. Then along came James Tague, and he said, well, where did my wound come from? And this is a documented case. There's pictures of him. Police officer took him to the hospital. So, there's all these factoids, and the Warren Commission had to scrap their first Warren Commission and create what we now know as the magic bullet. So just to give you a quick example, they now still said only 3 shots. We know 1 shot killed the president, took his head off. The other shot hit James Tague, the third person wounded in Dealey Plaza. So now we've got 1 bullet left to account for 2 wounds in President Kennedy, his back wound, his throat wound, and 5 wounds in Governor Connolly. And hence we have this incredible, well, I call it the Cirque du Soleil bullet. because we're talking to Bill, and he's a magician. And let me tell you, Bill, any bullet that goes downwards towards somebody's lungs and then all of a sudden comes popping back up out of their throat, and then does a 90-degree turn downwards again in midair, it can be nothing less than earmarked for Vegas. www.nightfrightshow.com, where you will find all great stuff. All the shows there are free, of course, folks. Just download them and enjoy your evening like we are tonight. Settle in, because this is getting creepy now. You know, Bill's been telling us that this poor little girl, 10 years old, Marcy, was thrown around the house, and there was no way her father could protect her. He called it the entity, whatever you want to call it, a demon, a poltergeist. It's up to you. Listen to the show, decide for yourself. And that's where we're at right now. We're trying to, I guess, define, because other people have gone through this too, define, I guess, on our own terms exactly what this type of scenario is. It is not manufactured. It is not smoke and mirrors. So what is it? If it doesn't fall into the normal, quote unquote, it has to be paranormal. Let's go back to Bill. Bill, just before the break, we were talking about what you would do if this happened to your family. Pretty much.
Yeah, no one's asked me that before. You really got me thinking.
Sorry, buddy. Well, welcome to the
No,
Night Fright Show. Yeah. You know, if it happened to, I'll be honest, folks, I'm a sissy when it comes to this stuff. I had just mentioned the JFK thing because I was friends with Ted. So I'll tell you this too, Bill. Because I was friends with Ted Sorensen, I was the only Canadian last year for the 50th memorial down in Dallas to be invited down to speak. And it was quite an honor, very, very much so. But the hotel I was staying in was called the Adolphus Hotel. And they don't mind me telling this story because I actually asked the concierge if it would be okay. It's an old hotel. I think it was made around the turn of the last century, 1890 something, 1900, whatever. Anyways, on the 18th floor, there was said to be this poor trapped ghost of a young girl who had committed suicide because her husband to be had left her at the altar and she hung herself. So I'm walking along the hallways with my camera and I go, if there's anybody here, please say hello. I'm going to cut to the chase. So when I get back to Canada, I'm going through all my stuff and I come across this footage. So I start watching it and listening to it. There's nothing in the footage at all. But as soon as I say, if there's anybody here, can you please say hello? In the distance, you hear, hello. So that was it. I turned it off, erased the tape. No, I didn't erase the tape. I still have it, but it scared me. So
yeah,
because nothing like
I don't
this
do
has
it.
ever happened to me before, and I don't want it to happen to me again. So when I think of a poor family like you're describing in your book, masterful book, folks, The World's Most Haunted House,
Thank you.
with tables turning and people being thrown and knives coming at you, oh baby, like we're sitting in the comfort of our own homes tonight, right, folks? And this is just entertainment, but this happened to these poor people. So here's my next question to you, and we will get to the end of this, folks. Don't worry, I'm going to ask him if it ever came to an end or if it just continues today. But my next question is, you wanted to do respect to these folks as well. Was there anything that you felt was a little dubious that you left out purposely because you did not want to respect the family and the terror that they went through?
Yeah. Did you say is there anything I left out?
Yeah.
Um, no, no,
Okay.
I didn't. I didn't find anything that. I mean, I would have if there was something that just shouldn't have been in there because it was private and not didn't relate to the story. But
Mhm.
but no, I didn't. The nothing that had the nothing with the family. There were some witnesses, two in fact, but and they were both Marcy's age at the time. So the not credibility, the witnesses were fine, but the memories and stuff were I couldn't confirm. And I did put that in the book actually, so I really didn't leave it out, but I didn't build it into the story because somebody said, "Well, they thought Laura had another uh, child that they gave up for adoption, or something like that. But no one in the Gooden family themselves knew anything about it or could confirm it. So if I didn't have multiple people or I couldn't confirm it, I did put it in there, like in the memory section with a footnote, and but I didn't want to build it into the story because I really wanted it to be a factual story that was limited to what was revealed in the testimony, as well as the interviews I did since then, because there's a lot of rumors around it, but I wanted to report on what I could verify.
Did the press aid this story, do you feel, looking back all these years later, or did they just exploit it? I think of today's news, anytime somebody has a hiccup on a bus somewhere, there's the press all over it for 3 or 4 days in a row. And serious news gets pushed to the side. Do you think they exploited this thing for their own benefit, or do you think they actually reported it with credibility?
I don't think there was anything horrible with the. I mean, there was inaccuracies in the paper, but that wasn't out of somebody doing something bad on purpose or whatever. From what I really saw was, once the Associated Press and Reuters got there, and once it went on the AP Wire, then all the papers carried the story and the follow ups on it. So I don't. Yeah, I wouldn't say it was. Well, I wouldn't say it wasn't exploited, because obviously, that stuff sells newspapers. But I think it was reported as accurately as they could. I didn't see any instances where the newspapers were making up crazy things that happened that didn't.
Was
And
there any television footage that still exists from way back then, or has it all been recorded over?
I couldn't. I did call up the various TV stations, and boy, we didn't keep good records back then. I mean, even the WNEB radio interview, they did one interview before they went silent in January 1975, and they said, "Oh no, they didn't even record them back then." Um, but now, the TV, I couldn't find any TV footage. Does somebody have footage somewhere? I mean, it's always possible, but couldn't find it. Even the crowd picture, thanks to social media, went as far as locating the photographer that actually took the picture. Even he didn't have a copy, and Associated Press didn't have a copy. They said they may have, so they did look for it, but they came back and said, no, we're sorry, because they did tell me the AP Wire photos they normally didn't keep. I'm sure there were exceptions, like the subject of your book, for example, but in this kind of thing, they didn't keep it. So,
So obviously, when you came across the actual reel-to-reel recordings of the interviews that the police took, that's a treasure in itself, isn't it?
yeah, I mean, all the cassettes, the data sheets. I mean, it all was a treasure. And what was really cool is, um, the story just kept growing because numerous witnesses came forward, and some I found. So because Boyce and the team that did the investigation, the two other gentlemen, Jerry Sulfin and Keith Harari, um, both from Duke University, they they were doing this for a whole different purpose, which was to help the family and to, get the documentation of everything that happened so that they can map it out, because they want to see if they can contribute something to
Hmm.
learning about poltergeist. That was one part of it, obviously, but they did want to help the family. So, they weren't saying, hey, Bill's going to write a book on this in 40 years. So, so there were some hidden gems in there. I'll give you an example. The Holsworth family, their daughter, who was in high school at the time, Susan, there was an interview being done with, what they saw. and they said, and the TV just floated down, and then they turned, they must have turned. I didn't see it, of course, but they said, "You saw that, right, Susan?" You can hear the voice go like they turned, and she goes, "Yeah, it just came out," but that was it. And so they didn't interview her. So I actually found Susan and interviewed her. So it was like really cool how, the little names and stuff that you picked up as you went. And then there were other people, the an engineer that came to the house. There was a plumbing electrical engineer that came to the house that they were called in, and one's no longer with us. The other is, and I interviewed him. And so all these little perspectives added some nice detail into the story. Some people in the crowd were interviewed, and the family members, of course, were the most precious of interviews in my mind. And it was really cool, Brent. I did a book signing at Barnes and Noble, and one of the Gooden family members showed up, and yes, it's so cool. And it was one I didn't interview, and she hugged me and said, "Thank you for telling the story, of my family," and it was just so cool. And she said, "I knew, Jerry and Laura, and they were wonderful, so we're talking, and of course, we got some pictures, and matter of fact, Voice Beatty and Paulino were there, and they shook hands for the first time. They haven't seen each other since 1974, so it was really kind of a reunion thing. There was a few people in the crowd, and then there was one, that were in the crowd at Lindley back then. And there was one lady who raised her hand. She goes, "I live next door, and I heard the screams." And I was like, oh. So, I mean, it's just, it's one of those kinds of stories. It's like 6 degrees of, of Lindley, yeah. It's, because there was just so many people involved, and somebody raised their hand and said, "My dad was a police officer. He didn't go in the house, but he knew all the guys that were, that were involved, that went in and everything." So, because it affected just,
Everybody.
you get that many people, just people who were in the crowd alone. I mean, you got thousands right there. So, very, very cool with, especially
What
with
due to the family at the time? It must have caused a lot of strife. Did they manage to stay together through all this?
Yes, they did. The real trouble was, the people, because Jerry would go to work and he would get picked on and ridiculed, and it was really bad. And and that causes stress, which ends up, he's getting stomach aches, and he was losing friends. People either were afraid of him, or they didn't trust them. So they were losing people that they, not everybody, of course, but they were losing some of the people that they, had known, and people didn't want to hang out with him at work, and it's just in every facet of their life. The mother would go put clothes in the clothesline, and people would tear the clothes down, and they slashed their tires, and they stole the windows off the house. I mean, if you're looking for demons, boy, I'll tell you, look outside the house. It's just, it's
We
just,
got enough of them running around the streets, don't we?
yeah. I mean, there was so, and we're talking, after, after they went through all this, not. I mean, they suffered during it, with the crowd, but even afterwards. And that's where Jerry was trying to explain to them, "I want to sell the house." And they're like, "Yeah, but don't you think it may follow you?" And he's like, "No, you don't understand. I can't live or work in this city." So he's saying, "You don't understand. It's not even about the poltergeist. If the poltergeist moves with him, that's bad enough. But, they want to get out of the city." So it was really bad. I mean, Laura ended up having a, nervous breakdown after, she wasn't, she wasn't super strong, and Jerry was pretty strong, and he was beside himself also, and he was not stressed out kind of guy. He's pretty easygoing.
Did they, often when people come on the show and they said, they've experienced a haunting, one of the misnomers is that it's not like a Hollywood movie when it happens all in the space of 10 minutes. And it just escalates. Usually it happens over the space of well, virtually years. And this is why people don't move out, because you'll have an incident and then everything will be calm for 6 months, and then another incident and then everything will be calm for another 6 months. Was that much the case when they first adopted Marcy?
Yeah, the things were very little, and um,
How
it
old
was
was she when she was adopted?
she was 4.5.
Oh, so this is quite a long time then, right?
Yeah, and then she was 10 by the time. Now, now an important part of the history here is the Goodins had Jerry Jr., who was their biological child, and he had cerebral palsy. He couldn't walk, couldn't talk, couldn't eat on his own, so he was completely dependent. And he died when he was 6.
Oh, God.
And after that, they adopted Marcy. Um, Obviously, not wanting to have more children because might have more children with with disabilities like that. And so when Marcy was adopted, she was given up from a family of 9. She was Five Nations Indian. She was adopted from Ontario, Canada, and she was one of 9 children, and she was given up for adoption. The only one who was given up for adoption. We don't really know what's behind that. So some theorize, hey, maybe she was causing trouble, or no one really knows, and the Goodins were told that she was, tied to a chair, and but again, we don't really know if she was tied to a chair because they had too many children to manage, or if she was tied to a chair, uh, is in a more abusive way, So again, and you can argue, hey, it's abusive if you tie somebody to a chair. I don't disagree, but I mean, we really don't know the context of all this. But
Agreed.
so there's there's that, and then the little boy dies, and they get Marcy, and now the parents, they're older parents to begin with, and they're strict Catholics, and they had to do everything for this little boy. So now they start raising Marcy the same way. They're smothering her, and she's very shy and introverted and in a strange land and doesn't fit in, and they won't let her cross the street. She gets walked to school and walked for lunch and all that other stuff. And the mother is always talking about she can't walk across the street, she may die. It's all about she might die because they're
Of course, they're shell shocked from the first one.
right. So then they have this really not normal way of approaching it, and probably because they didn't really know what was normal, and Laura didn't really have friends growing up, so there was some other complications. So they have this tension building, and then Marcy goes to school, and she's doing okay at the Catholic school, and then the father's hours gets cut, and they send her to the public school there, which is rougher school, and there's a African American boy beats her up in the cafeteria. And that's after a year of being picked on. So she's picked on every day, boys and girls. The color of her skin because she's olive, she doesn't fit in. And finally she gets beat up, and now she's at home in this soft body brace, and she's got the she's there with the mother who's overcoming. And is that for me?
Nope, it's mine. Sorry, I apologize. My apologies. I thought I had turned it off. Sorry, folks. First
That's
time
right.
that's happened.
I thought it was somebody calling in to donate money to us, Brent.
Yeah, wouldn't that be sweet? That'd be a first. Let me tell you. Let me do this before I forget.
Yeah.
David Thornberry, happy birthday, my friend. Kelly Logue, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I am so wrapped up with this show, both you guys. I apologize to both of you because I am so focused on the show and riveted. This is really hitting home tonight because, as our guest Bill just said, Marcy's right here somewhere in Ontario, and she whiz, that's really close to home for me. So the book is called, by the way, folks, The World's Most Haunted House. Get the book. Do yourself a favor. You're going to settle in one night and go for a great read. Um, Finish it over a weekend. You'll get the coffee going, get the tea going, a beverage of your hot chocolate. What a great time for a hot chocolate. It's the true story of the Bridgeport Poltergeist on Lindley Street. www.nightfrightshow.com. There you go, my friend. So yeah, so she's in Ontario right now. Is she aware that you've released this book?
I have no idea. Um, I really don't know. I put like a message on the website and,
Yeah.
through social media, you try to get the word out and, and, it's possible she could have moved and if, the information as to where she is and so on is a few years old, not 10 years old, but, you never know. But I would say there's a very good chance that, that's still where she is. But,
I'll ask you off air where she is because I don't want people going to look for her or bother her. But
right.
maybe I know a lot of First Nation folks in the communities and stuff, so maybe I can put the word out and see what we can do.
Boy, that would be really cool.
Yeah,
Well,
it'd be my pleasure.
cool if she likes it, but um, but yeah, so she's picked on and all this. And now she's stuck at home, and so she's stuck at home for 6 weeks in this overbearing, and she's very shy. She had no friends. She actually had one friend finally, but and it wasn't even that. I mean, most people avoided her, and they said she's weird, and like they do with shy people and that kind of stuff. But there were a few people, witnesses that came across that did try to play with her or felt sorry for her and tried to approach her, but she was so withdrawn, she just would run away or not respond or that kind of thing, which is not incredibly unusual. I mean, I think we all knew a few people like that, and I was very shy. I wasn't quite that shy, but so so she had all that stuff going on. And then, of course, after being stuck with the mother in the house for 6 weeks, and that's when this thing really blows up. So it's a typical poltergeist frustration of the preteen or teen sometimes in these cases. In this case, preteen, she was 10. And, that's when this thing really blew up. Before that, it was kind of a simmer, except for the bangings in every November on and off. And then in November '74, after all this stuff happened, that's when it culminated in the really huge amount of activity and entities appearing and appearing in various forms, like a black two-dimensional figure in the basement, and then the billowing smoke that is common as you see in like an exorcism kind of thing. And so there was just a whole bunch of different phenomena going on in the home. Definitely a lot.
It's funny you mentioned that. It sounds almost like shadow people or something. So there was a lot of weird stuff going on. Any of the neighbors experience anything like this at all?
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, a really great question, and probably one we didn't ask enough back then. But yes, I did find a few families. In fact, the complete story of one of them is in the book, and that's why I think this multiverse explanation certainly had. Although again, it probably could fit into any of these theories, but like what you mentioned, shadow person, a real, I guess you'd call it a lower level shadow person experience, is what one of the neighbors had. So it wasn't, it is some of the same kinds of things, but, of course, nowhere's near what happened on Lindley Street, and more of, the shadow person kind of thing that didn't really move, but, was there. And then there was some of the knocks and cold spots and things like that. But yeah, there were a few people. So, and my guess is there may have even been more, because certainly couldn't track down them all. But definitely there was 3 in the area that we know of that that had some problems.
Are they still experiencing problems? Are the houses still there? Is the original Lindley house still Lindley still there?
Yeah, the original Lindley house is still there. All my research, as well as actually the newspapers at the time and on there too, but I did my own. But we all agree that there didn't appear to be any incidents before the family moved in. And afterwards, after the Goodins died, So about 3 years later, the house was sold. The brother was executor. The house was sold in 2000. And I'm told it was a family that bought it for their mother, who's Portuguese, doesn't speak any English, and she's lived there ever since. Um, no real incident. I've been trying to figure out what's going on with the house for quite a while. So the timing of being on your show is awesome because this is the first time the news is really revealed here. But I finally got in touch with a neighbor. I'd knock on the doors and everything. They must have all thought it was
Great
crazy.
research, by the way, buddy.
Oh, thank you. So, so I finally see the neighbor, and I'm going over to talk to him, and of course he's wondering what the hell I'm doing, and I tell him, does anybody live in that house there? And he goes, why do you ask? And so I tell him, and he's like, oh, that's why. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, she calls me all the time, because he says we're friends, and I watch over her because she's older and stuff. And she calls me saying people are trying to rob me, and I'm telling her, what do you mean? He said, well, they walk on the property, they take pictures of the house, and so,
Okay.
yeah. And so
Gotcha.
he said, oh, for years, not all the time, but for years, she would call him, somebody is on my property, or somebody took a photo, so he's telling me about this incident. Some guy walked around the house and he took some pictures, and of course I'm realizing that this is me he's talking about. I'm like, oh, those people are horrible. So uh, of course, I thought the house looked unoccupied. There was a gate and that had this really rusty chain on it. And I said, well, how does somebody live there? This rusty chain on the gate, it's never open. He said, oh, she only uses the back door. So I'm like, oh no, I've been torturing this poor woman,
That's
you know,
funny.
trying to look through the windows and see, so finally, found that out. But it doesn't surprise. It probably wouldn't surprise. It would surprise me a little if somebody else had trouble. Probably, maybe not a lot. But with a poltergeist, as you know, being more of a, even though we call it haunted house because that's the area that where it happens, and some could argue that's where the portals opened, or whatever you believe. But we know it centers around the family, and of course, there's a good chance that if they move, it moves with them, versus the other kind of situation where they move out, next person moves in, and the haunting stays there. So it doesn't surprise me that nothing happened before or after. Probably surprised me a little if something did, but somebody else I ran into did say, my dental hygienist, by the way, said that she did run into somebody who lived in the house, who didn't know about the history and had to move out because of things happening. But she doesn't. So, I have this conflicting thing. I'm thinking the guy who knows the lady who lived there, he says she lived there for 14 years, which would match up perfectly with when the house was sold back in 2000, to now. But my dental hygienist, who I trust, but she says she doesn't know the person's name and she just met her at a party, and so it may have been referring to a different house. Who knows? So that's the whole story. But so my guess is, my short answer is, it looks like there was nothing before or after. Incidentally, my very first boss I ever had grew up in that house.
That's too weird.
Yeah, and I remember asking. That's the only time I never really investigated. But I remember when I was working, for him, I asked him. I said, "Well, was it really haunted?" He's like, "No, it was too small. We didn't have room for a ghost." He said.
Somebody else living in the house not paying rent.
Yeah, yeah. It was too small, but again, it would make sense. And of course, we all know that's a lot of people, cry hoax if they move in and it's still not haunted. But we all know it doesn't quite work that way.
Did you ever scare yourself writing the book? I'll tell you why. I compose music for film and Hollywood films and stuff like that. And I was working on a horror film one night, and I really got into this devil worship music and scared the bejesus out of me. I had to go home at 3 o'clock in the morning and close the studio down. Anything like that happened when you were writing your book?
um, it didn't scare me, but it was weird. part of it is I had all these tapes, and I decided I was going to have them all transcripted, which I ended up realizing my notes were better than some of the transcriptions I was getting back, because I couldn't afford expensive transcriptions. So I had all these people doing it from all over all over the place, you know.
Nothing wrong with that.
Right, nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But and so some of the people I'd send it to, and they started listening to it, and they would come back to me and said, you know, my door moved. I don't want to. Now I don't know if they were seeing things or just, but they said I don't want anything to do with it. Other people said, you know, the file's blank, and I'm playing it. It's fine. So I sent it to them again. They're like, you know, I played half of it, and then now it's gone. It's not on my computer. But I was hearing this from multiple people, so it was. So again, it's you know, I wasn't. You know, I'm a skeptic enough not to say, aha, it's, you know, supernatural, but it was very strange that there were, you know, 5 or 6 incidents like this. And then I myself was having, it wasn't because I have computer problems, and I'm, you know, I can break anything, but
You and me both.
yeah, right. But this was it was very different. It was very weird that these files were coming up, you know, erased, and had to, you know, redo them and stuff. It was very strange. And what really added to that is there was one interview where the tape went on, and Boyce said, he said, you know, we just recorded this tape and everything was working, and, you know, I tested it and played back some of it, and I put it on again, and now there's nothing on the side, so we're going to, you know, record it over. And I remember he made that comment. He didn't make a judgment. He just, you know, made it documented. But he had those problems back then. And I remember when I first heard him say that, I was like, oh, come on. You know, this was one of the first interviews I listened to. I'm like, come on, you know. But then after everything else, it was very strange. Another thing that came out on the tapes was there was an item that there was phenomena happening, and there was a buzzing on the tape that was picked up right while it happened, which was really cool. I know that's off topic, but while we're doing it, I figured
go ahead.
share, you know. And there was one part where Lorraine Warren got a burn on her wrist.
Really?
Yeah, they were sitting at the table, and she just, ooh, you know, and Paul even has medical background, because being a magician, the first thing I think of is, well, you say it's a burn, but is it a burn? You know, yeah, I mean, it could be something that looks like a burn, could be fake. You know, I'm always thinking, not because I think that she faked it, but because somebody's going to ask me that,
Yeah,
and I better investigate it right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Paul actually has medical training. He says, no, I looked at it. It was like a second-degree burn. It was,
Oh
you know,
my God.
yeah, real. But and so that's strange enough. But that actual incident, as it happened, is recorded on the tape. So most of these were, you know, interviews, you know. But this, I think they were trying to interview somebody, or were going to, and the tape was rolling, and this happened, and so the whole incident is on tape, which I thought was really cool.
Is there any way that people can listen to these tapes if they go through your website or pay a fee or something?
Right now there's bonus features that has the radio broadcast and the poltergeist sounds. And then when I lecture, I play some of it, and there's some transcriptions of it in the book to some parts that I thought were really pertinent. And then there's other things, you know, I have to watch depending on, are the people alive, and do I have permission to? Well, I have anybody alive I have releases from, but I don't have a release from Lorraine, because she's older now, and I did try to contact her, but I couldn't get any return calls, so I don't think the messages got to her, is what I would think. But
I heard she's gone back to playing with dolls. No, that's just a joke, folks. It's an inside joke. That's a bad one, too. Folks, the book is called The World's Most Haunted House, and it sounds like it may just well win that title from what author Bill Hall has been telling us tonight. It's the true story of the Bridgeport poltergeist on Lindley Street. www.nightfrightshow.com. Just click on tonight's guest book cover. Order the book. This is the perfect time of year for it, folks. It doesn't get any better than that. when
And
the lights are.
off the Brent's book too, because you're gonna run through a book and you need another book. So
I have to pay him now $10 for that. You know that,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
$10 American, not Canadian, too. So
I
we're
know he
looking at
talks so
almost
nice
20
about my
bucks
book. Now
Canadian.
I got to order your book, so I'm gonna do that.
You're a very kind man. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's talk a little bit about your magic career, because this is something that has always fascinated me, of course, the illusion. How do you uh, let people just go with their imaginations and disbelief? Are you still practicing?
Just as a hobby. I mean,
Practicing
I
makes
used to
you go
do like,
crazy.
yeah, I'm still practicing. I'll get it down someday. But, but yeah, I mean, I used to do a few hundred shows a year. I mean, it used to be, you got to do magic or you don't eat, and that was even just, part time most of the time, or at least 50%. But now it's just a, hobby and an eternal fascination with, um, the way the mind works. It's just amazing the
Mhm.
thinking involved and you would know, being with your experience, the thinking involved, because technology didn't do a lot for magic. I mean, some of the most startling new things that come out are just new ways of thinking, or just new slants on things, and it all has to do with the mind. So that it really, there's just some great thinkers.
Is there one in specific, something new, a new gimmick that you kind of like?
Uh, it's yeah. I mean, there's just so many,
Mhm.
it, and it's almost like we're getting smarter. In a way. But of course, the stuff from the 1500s still plays very well. I guess you could say the same thing with guitar, right? I mean, some of the classical stuff are still the most intricate, but yeah, it's real. I'm trying to think if there's anything, in particular, but
Are you big? Go ahead.
everything has, of course, a root. But I mean, I think mentalism and psychic power, that kind of thing, when you portray that as a magician, the thinking and some of the prediction tricks and whatnot, it just boggles the mind that there would be so many ways to do the same thing, and it's just crazy, the stuff they come out with, and to predict a newspaper headline that's sealed, and that's why it's so very difficult to come to a point where you can believe in so many things, as a magician, because you just see how well things could be faked. And like with psychic power, I mean, if or fortune telling, I mean, most magicians could tell fortunes better than the famous people on TV, like the
Mm.
Long Island psychic. I mean, I listened to her for like 5 minutes, and I'm like, oh my God, she's not only fake, she's not even good. Most of these people aren't talented even. You're like, there was, I don't know if it's Von Prague, or I don't know if I should mention names, but I
That's
mean,
fine.
some of these people, I'm like, they've been doing it for 12 years and they never got better. I mean, they're really bad at it. I'm like, I could do it better, and I'm not like an expert in that area. I'm like, oh my God, you think they would buy a few magic books or something, because, or is it the same thing with Uri Geller? I mean, oh my God, his sleight of hand is so bad, but it doesn't matter if people believe. I'm like, the magicians that bend spoons and keys and everything do it so much better. And I mean, you can see it when he bends it. I mean, if you're looking for it, it's just so easy. It boggles my mind. But anyhow, the things that you can pass on, even the things that are difficult to figure out, the things that you can pass out as real, is just absolutely mind-boggling. And that's why Houdini made a great statement after researching this stuff. He said, I don't want you to say I'm a skeptic. I just want you to understand that the things I do, um, scientists can't figure out, and other magicians even can't figure out, and I still get fooled even after all my training. So all I'm saying is, there really is no way, if you're not a magician, that you could, somebody who's not a magician should never be validating a fortune teller as being real. I mean, it's impossible. You don't have the skill. I mean, that's from my viewpoint. You don't have the skill, because it's not an opinion. It's a recognized art, and if you're following the art, I'll give you a really quick example if we have time. Like there are, there's principles that are used, and they're tried and true. And if you recognize somebody using the principles, they're fake. It's not an opinion. It's like if I say, well, Brent, first of all, they're always going to be asking questions. They're never going to tell you. They're always going to fish for stuff. So, they're going to say, Brent, I keep coming. The name Arthur keeps coming up in my mind, or Archer. I don't know. Do you know anybody named Arthur? Answer truthfully.
No.
No. How about maybe it's Archer? Is there anybody who hunts or anything having to do with hunting?
Oh yeah, my uncle.
Does he really? Seriously?
Yeah, he does. Seriously. Yeah. You're really good at this, aren't you? No, I'm teasing you. I'm teasing you now. You know that.
Right,
so,
right.
So you're reading me. That's a good example of reading.
So one of the principles would be I said Arthur and Archer, so I'm getting two guesses out of one thought. So if Arthur fails, then I have maybe it's Archer. And then you say Archer. I don't know. If Archer might ring a bell, probably not. Then I go to hunting. And then if hunting doesn't ring a bell, I go for searching. You're trying to find something, so you just keep going. And if you get too cold, which is why they call it cold reading somebody cold without knowing them, then you have to quickly go to something else. And there's some tried and true things, like when most people fall as a child, they injure their left knee. I don't know if you knew that, but it's,
actually.
And it's very popular for people to have had stitches or, injure their left. It's just one of those things. And so that's like, I used to use that all the time. I picture you injuring yourself as a child. Your left knee was hurting. And, sometimes you're wrong. But sometimes they'll say, I was injured as a child, but it actually wasn't my left knee. It was my right knee. Oh, I'm sorry. I probably was got the vision backwards in my head or so. You know what I mean? It's like if you believe, it's just so easy. It's like taking candy from a baby. And then you mix that in with some tricks. But, a lot of these people on TV are so bad. It's sad. They should really at least learn their craft if they're going to be faking people. But I don't want to go off subject, but
No, that's fine. I was going to ask you your opinion of Chris Angel.
Oh, I like Chris. He's got a good style. Some people hate him. I think he makes magic look cool for the youngsters, just like Copperfield did, during his prime. Although he's still doing fine, but no. But I like Chris. He's got it's funny because the guys he's got working for him. I mean, he's got some really old school magicians that. The kids would say, "Oh, he's stupid" or whatever. But those are some of the minds behind, helping them. I mean, all those. It's a small world, so when Doug Henning stopped, all the guys went and worked for Copperfield. That's the way it goes. Or not, Yeah. It's a small family, but no, I like Chris Angel. He gets some great tricks from other people, and he's not a bad thinker himself. But that's the way it is. But no, I think he does fine, and I really like the way he uses his look and persona to get away with things that you think are just part of his style. So yeah, I like him.
Fair enough. You had mentioned Harry Houdini before, and folks, if you ever come to Kingston, there's a theater downtown. Kingston's a couple of centuries old, more than that, I guess, called the Grand Theater, and Harry Houdini indeed played here. Back in the time. Now, what nobody is able to tell me is if he was on his way to Montreal or coming back from Montreal, where he had that fateful shot to the stomach that caused his appendix to burst, if I'm not mistaken. So if you ever come to Kingston, I've stood on the stage, and you can go there yourself and see all kinds of great shows. And not a stone's throw from here is another place called Picton. And Charlie Chaplin played there at an old theater that still stands there today. You can go in the theater, as a matter of fact. It's been refurbished, called the Regent Theater. So there's some plugs for the local folk. One more to go.
That's really cool. That's cool.
Seances. Dan Aykroyd just lives up the street. And the reason why he wrote Ghostbusters, folks, I have a whole show on this. I interviewed Dan's dad. Just a great guy. And Dan's into spiritualism, and he's into all kinds of things about the paranormal, UFOs and ghosts and stuff. The reason why he wrote Ghostbusters is because they used to have seances in the family farm, just up the street from where I'm living. So there you go. If you ever come to Kingston, there's three things for you to do, and that's not even going to be mentioning the maximum security penitentiary, where the worst of the worst of Canadian scum, and I say that with all sincerity because they were serial killers and rapists and everything else, were held for years. And that's one of the oldest buildings in North America. It goes back to 1820. Lots of history here. Lots of history. Our guest tonight, yeah, it's a real cool place. I'm from Montreal originally, but I really like Kingston. Kingston's pretty cool. And just geographically, folks, easy thing to do. If you're going to come to Canada, you probably want to go to Toronto. If you're going to come to Toronto, you're going to want to go to Montreal. Halfway between Montreal and Toronto, Kingston. It's right where the St. Lawrence meets Lake Ontario. And it's a great place to stop over and catch some real live history and a broadcast of Night Fright, of course. Our guest tonight, William Hall, has written a terrific book. You have to get this book, folks. If you've enjoyed tonight's show, man, are you going to like the book, because the book goes into far more detail. We're not rushing through stories. He pulls the stories apart, a lot more research, a lot more evidence, and it'll scare the bejesus out of you. The world's most haunted house, the true story of the Bridgeport Poltergeist on Lindley Street, and www.nightfrightshow.com. What's next for you, my friend?
Well, I'm currently involved in a very interesting case. It is a house that definitely looks like a haunted house. It's built in the 1700s, and it's been only owned by, I think, two families, or it's been in this family for three generations, and the couple is older now, and she's kept a diary since the 1950s. The house is haunted. All sorts of phenomena have occurred in the area, not just at her house. So there's UFO sightings, there's abduction-like visitations, there's spirits of prior owners, people that they know, loved ones. There's entities, there's cryptids, and there are other houses. We know at least of three that in that same, neighbors and area that have also phenomena. And the most interesting thing is that, well, maybe not most, but is the government has now put up a makeshift base there. It looks like they're trying to figure out what's going on. So it's almost like, I don't know if you heard of the Skinwalker case.
Sure.
Yeah, it's almost like a Connecticut Skinwalker kind of thing. And Paul introduced me to the case, and the family's quite agreeable to me, having the diary and stuff. So it looks like there could very well be a book there. I want to stay over at the house, and because it's still going on. I mean, this phenomenon's been going on since she was a child. In fact, this lady was often getting blamed for jumping up and down in the ceiling, so they were all getting yelled at as kids, and it wasn't them, and but all sorts of strange things.
Could you imagine your parents come in the room and tell you to stop jumping on the bed? It's not me, it's the poltergeist.
Yeah, that would be bad. I get in trouble for enough stuff I really did do. I don't want to get in trouble for stuff I didn't do.
No kidding. So this is an incredible opportunity for you. This is great, Bill.
It's been going on, forever. And now with the government there, people are walking through, the park there, and the armed guards are saying you can't go there. And so, and MUFON is aware of the area too. So it's almost like ground zero of all this paranormal stuff. So,
kind of portal there.
I have to see
Let me ask you this. I wanted to ask you, we've only got a minute and a half left. I get flooded with ghost stories from around the area. Primarily, all of our older buildings here in Kingston and Montreal as well were made out of limestone. Was the Lindley house made out of wood?
Yes.
Hmm.
There was an underground spring there, though.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and Bridgeport, as a city, just has a lot of paranormal things. Connecticut in general, but Bridgeport in particular, being and being near the water and stuff. But it has the high water tables and the sandy soils, and this house in particular had um, underground spring, and actually is right near a graveyard. For those that feel that makes a difference, I'm not really sure. If that has anything to do with it, but I got to be inclusive because, again, open to all theories.
No, I
But
like your
and there's the
theory
Native
about.
American connection. So I mean, there's just a lot of different theories you can have on it. But this definitely had that kind of electromagnetic, interruption, if you will, potential there. So the limestone thing is very interesting. And appears to make some sense there.
We've only got a minute left, so let me do this real quick, folks. What a great book. What a great show tonight. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. The World's Most Haunted House, the true story of the Bridgeport Poltergeist on Lindley Street. William Hall's the author, www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on tonight's guest book cover, take your pictures, go for more. I think I'm going to be home. Bill, thank you so much. Take care, my friend.